For nearly a century, three countries dominated the automotive world: Germany, Japan, and the United States. From this triangle emerged the names that defined how the planet moves: Toyota, Volkswagen, Mercedes, Ford, Honda, BMW. These weren't just companies, they were the pride of entire nations, the industrial backbone of continents. In just 3 years, it's been a bloodbath. Mercedes saw its net profit plummet by 28%. Porsche lost 92% of its earnings in a single year. Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep, Peugeot, and Fiat, recorded a $26 billion loss, the worst in its history. Volkswagen announced the elimination of 50,000 jobs. Behind each of these seismic shifts, one name consistently emerges: BYD. A company that, until 2003, manufactured nothing more than simple rechargeable batteries. Back then, the idea of them ever competing with Tesla literally made Elon Musk laugh. We've all seen the video. Today, he's not laughing anymore. BYD sells more electric cars than any other brand on the planet. But how did a small battery workshop manage to bring the entire global automotive industry to its knees in less than a decade? And more importantly, why is no one truly talking about what's happening behind the scenes? Because BYD didn't just appear out of nowhere. The official story doesn't tell you everything. That's precisely why I created Throttle Garage, to discuss what most Western commentators misunderstand, often because they've never set foot in Asia. The classic mistake when talking about BYD is believing it's a Chinese story unfolding solely within China. That alone would be terrible news for Mercedes or Volkswagen, but at least they'd have their domestic markets left. The reality is far more brutal. BYD and other Chinese manufacturers aren't content with reigning only in Beijing or Shanghai. They are planting their flag on every continent, simultaneously. And no one seems able to stop them. Southeast Asia felt the initial and most violent shock. In Thailand, a country once dubbed the Detroit of Asia, because Toyota, Honda, and Mitsubishi had reigned supreme for 40 years, BYD captured 40% of the electric vehicle market in just 18 months. Mitsubishi closed its local factory. Mazda reduced its production by 60%. A region that had been a Japanese stronghold for 4 decades flipped in a matter of seasons. In Singapore, 1 in 5 new cars sold last year was a BYD. In Malaysia, BYD became the country's leading EV brand in 2024. Closer to home, the picture is no brighter. Chinese brands now account for over 11% of electric vehicle sales in Europe, and this share is climbing every quarter. Renault just reported its first net loss in 5 years, warning that its margins would continue to shrink under Chinese pressure. Stellantis is bleeding on its home turf. Even Audi, long considered untouchable in the European premium segment, is simultaneously losing market share in China and Europe. Friedrich Merz, a leading German politician, was compelled to fly to Beijing with about 30 business leaders on his plane. Not to sign contracts, but to plead with Xi Jinping to ease the pressure on German industry. 20 years ago, such a scene would have been unthinkable. It speaks volumes about the reversal of power dynamics. Then there's Brazil. A market no one anticipated. BYD captured 72% of the Brazilian electric segment in a single year and opened a massive factory, literally on the ruins of a former Ford plant, abandoned by the Americans. The symbolism is almost too perfect. The same scenario unfolded in Mexico, Israel, and Norway, one of the planet's most demanding EV markets, where the BYD Tang immediately landed in the top 5 sales upon its launch. The United States is the only major market where BYD officially remains blocked, citing national security concerns. But in Washington, no one is talking about victory. More like a reprieve. Because everywhere else, the trend is the same. Wherever BYD arrives, local competition falters. Sometimes in months. Sometimes in mere weeks. So, the real question is, how? How did a company no one in the West had heard of 5 years ago achieve what no Western automaker saw coming? The easy answer, cheap labor, doesn't hold up. Dozens of other Chinese brands had the same advantage and never broke through. What BYD built is something else entirely. Something Mercedes and Toyota should have studied a decade ago. To understand what they built, you need to know who built it. His name is Wang Chuanfu. In 1995, at 29, he borrowed the equivalent of 35,000 euros from his cousin, rented a small workshop in Shenzhen, and started manufacturing rechargeable batteries. 7 years later, he was supplying Motorola and Nokia. By 2003, BYD had become the world's largest battery manufacturer. That year, he did something no one understood. He took the money earned from batteries and bought a bankrupt state-owned car factory in the middle of nowhere. His own shareholders tried to stop him. BYD's stock lost the equivalent of 300 million euros in 2 trading sessions. The Chinese financial press openly scoffed. A battery manufacturer tackling one of the most capital-intensive industries on the planet. Wang Chuanfu didn't even have a driver's license. Yet, his logic was simple and clear. He was convinced that the future of cars wouldn't be about the engine, but the battery. And no one in the world mastered batteries better than him. Everyone else sought to electrify a car. He sought to build a car around an object he already knew inside out. It would take him 15 years of humiliation before the rest of the world understood. 15 years during which journalists mocked his cars, during which Elon Musk scoffed on American television at the mention of BYD's name. During these 15 years, Wang made 3 decisions that would change everything. The first was to never depend on anyone again. Tesla buys its batteries from Panasonic. Volkswagen relies on hundreds of subcontractors for chips, engines, electronics, even glass. BYD, however, decided to manufacture everything in-house. Batteries, of course, but also semiconductors, motors, power electronics, windshields, headlights, and even the software powering the dashboard. When the global chip shortage paralyzed the automotive industry in 2021, BYD simply ramped up production in its own semiconductor factories and continued to deliver. When lithium prices soared, they were already extracting it in Tibet and South America. Every crisis that weakened their competitors only strengthened BYD. The second decision was a gamble on what seemed boring. While Tesla and all of Silicon Valley were evangelizing pure electric vehicles, Wang discreetly invested in plug-in hybrids, cars that run on electric power daily and switch to gasoline for long journeys. In Palo Alto, this looked like a compromise. But in most of China, where charging stations were scarce outside major cities, it was the only solution that made sense for hundreds of millions of drivers. By the time the Western press was still debating the technological legitimacy of hybrids, BYD was already selling more plug-in hybrids than Tesla sold cars across all categories. This compromise opened access to 500 million Chinese consumers that Tesla could never reach. And once that volume was acquired, economies of scale did the rest. The third decision sealed the trap. In 2020, BYD released the Blade battery. A different chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, instead of the nickel-cobalt cocktail used by everyone else. Cheaper to produce. It doesn't ignite, even when a nail is driven into it. And it lasts longer. This last point changes everything. It meant BYD could sell its cars for less than Tesla, while also boasting a genuine safety advantage. 4 years later, Tesla began buying batteries from BYD for its own cars. Read that sentence again. The company Musk publicly ridiculed is now supplying the batteries that power Teslas. Yes, that collaboration was short-lived. But you understand the idea, BYD didn't just build better cars. They built a system that their competitors are structurally unable to copy. Or so the official version goes. The one you'll read in every management review, in every Harvard business case study celebrating BYD as the next Toyota. Vertical integration, audacious hybrid bet, revolutionary battery. That's it. Story over. Except, that's not the real story. Not by a long shot. From day one, BYD has been playing a game where no one else on the field is allowed to play. Between 2015 and 2020, the company received approximately €4 billion in direct subsidies from the Chinese state. In 2016, the year they poached Audi's star designer, the public aid received exceeded the group's total net profit. Read that sentence again. Without the Chinese government's checks, BYD wasn't making money that year. They were losing it. And that wasn't the only year this happened. The aid took every conceivable form: free land for factories, zero-interest loans from state banks, massive tax credits for research and development, guaranteed public contracts for buses and taxis in hundreds of Chinese cities. And most significantly, direct subsidies to buyers, meaning every BYD sold in China arrived at the customer's doorstep already discounted by state aid. At its peak, analysts estimate BYD pocketed between €2,000 and €4,000 in public money per vehicle rolling off its assembly lines. Stop for a second and think about what this means for a Volkswagen or a Toyota. When they calculate a car's price, they're competing against a rival whose margin isn't defined the same way theirs is. BYD can sell at a loss for years while still reporting profits because the Chinese state silently covers the difference. This isn't a fair market. It's the exact opposite. That's why Mercedes can't simply make better cars. That's why Stellantis can't simply cut costs further. The problem isn't that BYD is faster, smarter, or more innovative, even if they are all of those things. The problem is that BYD is part of a national industrial strategy. Made in China 2025-inch, the plan Xi Jinping unveiled a decade ago, openly listed automotive among the 10 sectors China intended to dominate globally. BYD is the instrument. China is the player. The most cynical part is that by the time Western governments woke up and started talking about tariffs and investigations, Beijing was already scaling back the most aggressive subsidies. Not because they were forced to, but because the job was done. The machine was built. The global supply chain was locked in. The competition was already on its knees. The aid served its purpose, then quietly faded, leaving Western politicians chasing a problem that had already changed its nature. Except, for BYD, cracks are starting to appear. The first crack emerged in early 2025 when a small independent research firm based in Hong Kong, GMT Research, published a report that sent shockwaves through the financial press. According to their analysis, BYD's true debt bears no resemblance to the 42 billion yuan officially reported by the company. It's estimated to be closer to 323 billion yuan, almost 8 times higher. The missing pieces are hidden in what accountants politely call supply chain financing. This is another way of saying that BYD pays its suppliers an average of 275 days after delivery. 9 months. In an industry where the norm is 50 to 60 days. Technically, these unpaid invoices are debt, but they don't appear on the balance sheet. BYD uses its own subcontractors like an unpaid bank, and the scale of this phenomenon is starting to rival what Evergrande did in real estate, just before everything collapsed. There's another practice no one openly discusses in China, but everyone in the industry knows about. It's called zero-kilometer used cars. The mechanism is simple and chilling. At the end of each month, when sales targets are due, BYD dealerships register thousands of new cars under the names of shell companies they control. They then immediately put them back on the used car market, labeled used, 0 kilometers. On paper, these cars count as new sales. In reality, no real customer ever bought them. They end up parked in huge empty lots across China, sometimes for months. Images taken in 2024 show entire rows of abandoned BYDs in fields, slowly rusting in the rain. A salesperson from Guangzhou confirmed, under anonymity, that they were asked each month end to register 200 to 300 cars under partner company names, solely to meet targets. Which raises a rather awkward question: when BYD announced selling 4.25 million vehicles last year, how many were actually purchased by real humans? Quality issues, meanwhile, are accumulating in parallel. In September 2024, BYD had to recall nearly 97,000 vehicles due to a steering column defect that could cause short circuits and spontaneous fires, their largest recall at the time. Well, largest. Until October 2025, when they were forced to recall another 115,000 for a different defect. On Chinese social media, complaints about the Sea Lion SUV, radio cutting out after 3 months, GPS inventing routes, wipers freezing in heavy rain, exceeded 5,000 official reports in a single week. In Brazil, BYD is being prosecuted by the Ministry of Labor for conditions described in court documents as slave-like at its factory construction site in Bahia. 163 Chinese workers. Passports confiscated. 14-hour days. No rest days. The case even reached President Lula. And the numbers, too, are starting to falter. Net profit in 2025 declined by 19%. Global sales in the first months of 2026 dropped by 41% year-on-year. Geely, the Chinese rival, is seriously eroding BYD's market share on its home turf. And the Chinese government itself issued a public warning late last year, telling its own manufacturers that the price war they're waging was no longer sustainable. When Beijing tells its own champions to calm down, you know something is amiss. None of this means BYD will collapse tomorrow morning. The group remains massive. It remains profitable, on paper. It remains the world's #1 electric vehicle manufacturer. But the cracks are very real, and those pointing them out aren't going away. Some are even openly uttering the word Evergrande. Whether they're right or wrong, the mere fact that this word is circulating tells you how much more fragile the miracle might be than it appears. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you think of all this. Because Beijing is already rolling out the exact same scenario in half a dozen other industries. And you don't even need to guess which ones. Beijing has published them. It's called the 15th Five-Year Plan, and it precisely names all the sectors China intends to dominate globally. Read it once, and you'll never look at economic headlines the same way again. The reason I'm telling you all this isn't to scare you. It's that if you're building a business in 2026 thinking the world still operates like it did in 2005, you're going to crash head-on into something you never saw coming. The rules have changed. The top players of today are no longer in Detroit, Stuttgart, or Tokyo. They're in Shenzhen, Hangzhou, and a dozen other cities the average Westerner couldn't place on a map. Whether BYD collapses next year under the weight of its hidden debt, or becomes the Toyota of the 21st century, it almost no longer matters. What matters is the larger story playing out behind it. And it won't stop with automobiles. If you've seen this same shift happen in your own sector, electronics, solar panels, drones, steel, pharmaceuticals, whatever it may be, tell me about it in the comments. I read them all. And if this is the kind of analysis you want to see more of, subscribe. Because this story won't be told to you from an office in Paris or New York. We're telling it to you from the inside. From where it's being written. See you soon.